Okay, I think we're here, folks. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm so sorry for the delay. We practiced this like for a number of minutes yesterday, and still we ran into technical difficulties with LinkedIn. So here we are, though, and I'm here today with Meri Williams. Meri, I'll let you introduce yourself so
Cool.
I don't screw it up. So let's start there.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Meri. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm CTO at Pleo and chair of the Lead Dev conference series.
Such a simple intro. But thank you. So yeah, really excited to you. We had this conversation, probably like this whole conversation just a couple of weeks ago, and then I was like, hey, we should record this. So thanks for being here.
Sure.
So just maybe start by telling me, I have followed your career a little bit for one over the years, mostly through knowing you from Lead Dev. But maybe tell me just a little bit about, what is your job? What does it mean to be the CTO at Pleo? What does that mean? And what
Sure.
are you, more importantly, what are you accountable for?
Yeah. So I'm the group CTO at Pleo. So I have a team of about 250 people, 200 engineers, 50 in data. And we partner very closely with the folks in product and in design and user research. And we together kind of call ourselves the makers. So we're the folks that make the product of Pleo. And within that, I'm responsible for us kind of building the actual product. So Pleo is a spend management solution. It's basically expense management that people love rather than hate, which I did not realize until I joined here. It's been a real joy. I did not think that an expense management solution would be something that had people coming up delighted talking to me about my company, but people like it that much that they do. And my responsibilities are to make sure we have the right team to develop that product and improve it, but also to run it on a day-to-day basis. So I have the platform, infrastructure, the teams that build the kind of tooling that we use to build our product, and all of that side of things. And given we're a financial technology business, there's a bunch of compliance work as well. So making sure we meet the expectations of the Danish Financial Standards Authority and the UK FCA, which is the equivalent authority here in the UK. So a really interesting mix of kind of leading an engineering team, figuring out architecture of the future, making sure we're compliant and that we're safe and that people's money is in the right place and nothing happens to it that shouldn't happen to it. So all of those things. And then also things like trying to make sure that we use AI in a good way, that we're becoming more efficient as a company and more tech enabled as we scale, and that kind of stuff. As a business, we have about 900 employees and over 100 million in revenue. So we're medium sized, but we're growing fast.
Is this your first adventure with a fintech? Or have
No,
you
I
been down
was
this road before?
been down this road before. So I was CTO at Monzo for a couple of years, which is a UK
Right,
bank,
right.
and then I've actually done health tech as well. So I was at Helix, which was AI-driven drug discovery for a while, which was a different kind of regulator and a different
Right.
kind of set of expectations, but also very interesting. A little bit slower moving. I remember joining Helix, somebody telling me that if we could get a drug from idea to drug in 7 years, that would be like really fast. And I was just like, wow, this is a very different kind of scale of time than I'm used to. So
Yes, yes,
super
and yes,
exciting.
7 years would be very impressive.
Yeah,
My ex works in that industry, so I'm familiar.
it's very tough. Very
Yes, yes. So we're here to talk about productivity, of course,
tough.
because developer productivity and engineering effectiveness as a whole. Pleo is a customer of Swarmia. We're not going to talk about that in great detail because we know you love us, but we can certainly
We
talk
can talk
about
about
it
it if you want to.
as it comes out. But really, I'm more interested in learning not how you use our product, but how you think about productivity in an organization like Pleo. And kind of what are some of the challenges as you're thinking about making that a highly effective engineering organization? What are some of the challenges that you're having to tackle?
Yeah, so we have some in terms of like what world class means to us. We've taken some of the external benchmarks, things like cycle time below a couple of days and throughput being at the right level and those kind of things. And we've looked at some of the stuff that Swarmia has published and the stuff Linear B has published, and tried to benchmark ourselves externally. And that's helpful because it's a sort of similar measuring stick that our board can use against us and against their other companies. So they, they look at us and think our engineering team is quite big, particularly compared to some of our competitors, and they want to know that they're getting good effectiveness out of that team. And so that's interesting to have those conversations. The other main metric we use is like what proportion of our work is capitalizable, and that's on the one hand a super specific technical finance term, and it shows up in your books a different way if something's capitalized than if it's operational cost and those kind of things. But the reason we use that is that it's a really good kind of indicator of what proportion of time our teams are spending building stuff that is helping customers. And so we reckon that if more than 50% of the time of the team is spent on building things that either are new features or expansion and improvements to our features, and expansions and improvements to our product, or new products in its entirety, then that's a pretty good kind of measure for us. Because we don't imagine that we should be spending all of our time on brand new stuff, right? We run what we've built. We need to make sure that everything that we've developed is working and delivering day to day, which I think is one of the big challenges of engineering and of engineering effectiveness, right? Is we get very focused on the code that we're writing, but the code that's delivering value is the code that's running. And easy to forget that. It's really easy to focus too much on the new thing that you're building and not enough on the thing that's already running and delivering all that value for your customers.
Right. How'd you arrive? I love that you're focused on capitalizable work, because like at the end of the day, and that's what we have the same thing in the US too. And at the end of the day, that's what IRS says, you don't have to pay so much taxes on this. And although the rules changed in the US recently in some really wild ways, but that's a subject for another podcast. But was that intuitive? Like, oh, of course we should focus on this? Or how did you choose that when you could choose so many other, you could choose any range of metrics to be having this conversation?
So I think the fact that we're a fintech makes it easier to choose a more financial metric, for sure. So I think that that was partly how we came to it. And part of it was just out of a reality that we were at a point a few years ago where we were not spending very much of our time on new stuff. We were spending 80% of the capacity of the team on just keeping the lights on and keeping things running. And that was indicative of some real underlying architectural problems that we were having, right? And like a lot of places and a lot of companies, we started out with a monolith, and it got a little messy and a bit spaghetti code, and then it grew too much, and then we depended on it too much, and then we got scared to change it because it's spaghetti code, and so anytime you change it broke something.
Right.
And so
but it also makes all the money.
It's all the money. And so we were coming from this spot where we had slowed down in terms of our velocity of producing new features and new capabilities, but there wasn't much transparency for the board and for the executive team on why that was. It just, people looked busy and they were clearly working hard, but the output wasn't there. And then the outcomes weren't there either, right? We weren't having the effect on the metrics that were needed. And so part of why we came up with capitalizable percentage as one of our key kind of indicators of progress was so that we could measure the work we were doing on tech debt and whether it was actually making a difference. Because I think there's this tendency when you've got a lot of tech debt to want to go off into the corner and just spend time fixing that and only that for as long as it takes. And, there's this desire to just, go hide in a corner and fix everything that you can. And that's super dangerous because every week that you're not developing and building new features and new capabilities, you're falling behind, right? And so that was part of what what drove us to that metric. It's also helped us to have better conversations internally about what projects we're doing and what the value of them is, and what the business value is. But a lot of it just came from us wanting to be able to show the output and outcome improvement from us having dealt with some of this monolithic kind of architectural issue that we had as a company.
So you make an interesting point there that an engineer's inclination to when faced with a problem like we have too much tech debt, or even just we aren't as productive as we need to be, an engineer's inclination is to write more code to solve that problem. Right? So what actually have been the solves? Like, what is the mix of writing new code versus reorganizing teams versus whatever else that you've had to do to kind of actually move toward that goal?
So we've done quite a bit of all of those. So we've reorganized our teams so that they're covering broader parts of the user experience. So we have kind of 2 squads of engineers with every product manager and designer, so that they work on a kind of broader piece of the product and have more ownership for that. We've done a lot of moving away from the monolith towards something that's a bit more service oriented. And then the other major intervention we had is that we instituted an API first way of working at the beginning of 2023, where we just said, hey, everybody having to understand the intricate details of the inside of all of your services all the time is meaning it's almost impossible for somebody new to onboard effectively. It was taking 6 to 9 months for people to be really productive once they joined the company, and that was just way too long. And so we've gone with this sort of API first strategy, which abstracts away some of the complexity when you're building, so that you can just focus on the thing that's in front of you, and that's been pretty valuable as well. But it took us introducing a bunch of golden paths and what I call sensible defaults. I don't like standards because I think standards can feel stifling. Saying you have to use this, you have to use that is a guaranteed way to piss off engineers and to lose some of the creativity from the team. But if you say, hey, you know what, if you do it this way, you get a bunch of stuff for free, that's a much more popular approach. And it means then that if people do go, if you need to do something different than what the sensible default or the golden path says, that's okay. But you're not going to get as much for free. You're going to have to do some extra work to make sure that you can monitor and alert and, have the right observability and all of those kind of things. And you're going to have to care more about long-term maintenance than you might have done if you built it according to the sort of sensible default way of working. So yeah.
How do you I'm guessing there's a platform team something in the mix here that's making those sensible defaults, right? How did they choose? How did they know what to work on next? How did they discover what to work on next? As far as is it? Yeah, just tell me.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting mix. They do use user research techniques. So they'll do surveys of the engineers in the company. They'll sit and do sort of like amateur ethnographic stuff where they'll go sit in a team and see what's bothering people and what's frustrating for them, and those kind of things. So one of the examples was we used to have services that were too big, too many different concerns in one. And it was partly because creating a new service was like a day's worth of work, or worse. Sometimes I couldn't fathom that it could be worse than a day. And so one of the things that one of our teams in the platform engineering org did was they said, okay, cool, we'll create something where you can get from nothing to the outline of a service in under 10 minutes. And did a kind of wizard that was then part of it. And so that's part of it. But I actually just come from my engineering all hands, and one of the questions I got was from somebody who sits in the platform team saying, like, how can we get to know our users better and know what they need better? And so now it's, one of the other things we're talking about is whether we should rotate people from platform over into product teams so that they get to live it for a sprint or a month or a quarter at a time, and then go back to their platform team and be like, so I have been to the wilds and experienced the drama, and now what we've got to fix. Trust me, this is the thing. And so that's something
I know.
that we're talking about.
Yeah. I'm just curious, is there a product manager in the mix with that platform team? This is a hot topic sometimes. But...
So we have some, yes. So some of the teams, the engineering manager or the tech lead plays the sort of product manager role, especially where it's deeply technical, like DevX, and we have a team called Backend Core that builds the kind of common libraries and components that everybody uses for the backend services. And then so in most of the platform teams, there is somebody playing that role, but they've come from an engineering background, so they're usually tasked with learning these product management techniques and so on. But in a couple of areas, we have got people who, like, their full-time role is to be a technical product manager or a technical program manager, and so we have that as well. But it's a mix of the two at the moment. I'm quite a fan of technical product management. I think it's a good skill set to have, but I think often the people who are best at it are people who they've been an engineer and now they've expanded their capability into having some of that product management craft as well. So.
Yeah, it's I've certainly seen the failure mode where the platform team really doesn't have anyone playing that role, and they're building, they're building to spec, but not necessarily building to actual user needs. So that's cool to hear.
Building what they want rather than what the users. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be fun if we could? So we talked a little bit about how you kind of surface productivity, effectiveness, whatever data upwards. What about, and I want to put air quotes around upwards and downwards. We're all humans, right? But there's also an org chart. So how do you kind of, let's say, push this down, but how do you kind of like make this part of being in engineering at Pleo?
Yeah, so we have what we call the Maker dashboard, and it's a dashboard that's got all of the key stats for a team, and a bunch of those we pull in from Swarmia. We pull in from other places as well, though it's connected to our HR system, so you can at a glance see who's in the team, who's the tech lead, who's the product manager, etc., etc. And so that's the primary way that we use it, and then what every team in the whole company actually does is we have a monthly ritual of what's called a support meeting, and the intention is for it to be the company bringing support to the team, and so it's not a status update. It has some elements of status update in it, but the more important thing is like what challenges are we facing, how can we overcome them. And so as part of that, every team would share their Maker dashboard, which includes everything, like I said, from Swarmia metrics through to employee NPS, through to number of incidents that we've had, and what the resolution time was, and whether there's still any open, and all of those kind of things. And so we try to have this fairly holistic view of each team. And then I think the art is in using that information well. So I'm a fan of metrics where even if people try to game it, they're kind of playing themselves because they're getting it right.
Playing
right? Oh no, you've divided your work into smaller chunks. Terrible. That's
terrifying.
Oh no, you're doing your stories in a way that they can be done in a day or two rather than in a week or two. Oh no, that's terrible. And so I'm a big fan of, I think if anybody went egregious with it, if they started putting one line of code in every PR or whatever, it would just become annoying for their colleagues. And so I think that's the sort of safety net against people like gaming it too much, because I do think you get what you measure, and you've always got to be careful of what earlier in my corporate career used to be referred to as watermelon metrics, where they're green on the outside, red on the inside. And so I think that's the art of it, is to have enough visibility that you go, oh, this is interesting. This teaches us something about how this team is doing, and then we can iterate and learn and adapt and try something different and see if things change over the next sprint or the next cycle, whatever methodology you're using. But I think that's the interesting side of it, is like pick metrics that even if people try to game it, they're kind of doing the right thing anyway. Right. And then to not view it as the only view that you've got of a team. And so a very unhappy team that's very productive isn't what I'm looking for either, right? I want people and teams that are high performing and happy and feeling empowered and able to get good work done.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that this capitalization goal maybe doesn't make sense at the team level, but maybe it does. I don't know. No. But yeah, I'm guessing no. We can't.
Like spend more time on stuff that helps customers. Absolutely makes sense at this level. But it's at a much broader level that you have to that you want to do that, right? Because my infrastructure team, it's not a problem if they're not spending 60% of their time building new shit all the time, right? It would probably be a problem if they were.
Probably if they were.
But then a product team, in an ideal world, they've built things in a way that they don't have to spend a huge amount of time keeping the lights on. They're they're owning what they've built. They're keeping track of the observability for their product. They're able to and willing to respond rapidly if there are incidents. But they ideally will be mostly focused on the new things that they're able to develop.
So if that goal doesn't make sense at a team level, which I agree it doesn't, what kind of goals are teams setting, or are you asking teams to set goals around productivity metrics, or is it more of just this check-in that you're looking at on a regular basis?
No, it's more of a one input amongst many of a kind of conversation.
Got it.
And so if if I had a month where it was all incident response and no feature work, then that would prompt conversation. It would be like, well, what happened, right? What was going on? And okay, you had 4 people out on parental leave, and this happened, and we're based in the Nordics. It can happen that 4 people are out on parental leave. Very, very good at parental leave over there. But yeah, I think it's less about it being a kind of hard and fast measure and more about it being the start of a conversation that's then useful. In terms of how what teams are aiming at, they do have objectives and key results. So we do an OKRs kind of cascade from the company level down all the way to teams on the ground. And so teams are generally kind of running a product that has a set of KPIs that go with it, that how well is it used and how much revenue are we capturing, and what's the customer response and the NPS and all of those kind of things. But also what change are we trying to make at the moment? Are we trying to enable capture of more spend, or are we trying to help companies have more of their employees using the solution, or try to make it so people spend less time on their expense reports because it's not exactly the highest value. You need things to be accurate, and your finance team needs it to be up to date and have the right evidence attached for taxes and legal requirements. But nobody goes, I'm so glad I spent an hour on my expenses today, right?
You should see the pile under my computer right now.
I mean, that's one thing Pleo is really good for, is that you don't have that pile anymore. You just take a photo as you go, and it really works.
I'm so bad at that.
But yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me actually when I worked on in the government digital service in the UK, and we built gov.uk, which is the sort of main website for the UK government. And it was really interesting. We had a metric once, which was how fast does somebody leave the site as a positive metric.
Right.
If you're providing information, like the classic example was the public holidays page, the bank holiday page. And when somebody comes to the page that's about when most people, when they come to that page, what they want to know is Monday a holiday, right? When's the next one? because they weirdly in the UK it's almost always a Monday, which
Always
is
Monday, yes.
public day off. And so we worked out that actually if somebody came to the web page that was all about the bank holidays, the public holidays, then if the in size 30 font was Monday is a holiday, and then they immediately closed the tab or navigated away, then you're like, cool, I have just saved the country.
Did it.
And then I saved the country some time because a load of people got an answer faster than they were expecting, and that's completely at odds with what is the normal website desire, which is to keep people as long as possible, and how many active users have you got and all this kind of stuff. But actually, when your true metric is like efficiency of a country, then it's not good that they stay on the website loads of time. It's much better if they get the answer they need and they go, right? So,
right. Yeah, I don't know if you worked with her, and Alice Bartlett also at the digital service, and yes, she's had lots of fun stories to tell me about those times and the unintuitive nature of it when it's not a product. So you talked about how teams tend to own a product, and that product or a product area, and that product area tends to have KPIs. How are you doing on the whole outcomes over outputs thing, as far as like getting teams focused on the thing they're trying to accomplish versus the task they're trying to do?
Yeah. So one of the things there is I think it's very easy to end up too focused on outputs, to go like, oh, did we ship the thing we said we were going to ship, more than did we have the impact on the customer that we said we wanted to have. And I think it's one of the arts of product management, right, is to translate your KPIs and your OKRs into meaningful change for your customers. There's a fantastic book by Kathy Sierra called Badass. I'm not sure if you've read it, but I highly recommend it, which is all about this mindset of, nobody cares about your product. They care about what they can get done with your product. They care about their lives and their time and how you're helping them to spend their time. And so I think that's one of the things that's really valuable. In our product development lifecycle, we're trying to get better at helping people set those measures and expectations up front. So before you put something live, how are you going to measure it? How are you going to see whether it has the impact that you want to have? And eventually, what does that translate into? Because eventually it either makes things, more compliant, safer, less risky, or it makes things worth more money, or it, so either capturing more SaaS fee or more spend, because the way Pleo works, we get a tiny cut of every bit of spend on the platform, as well as the SaaS fee that people pay, or it reduces cost. And so I think that's the other side of it, is to help everybody in our maker group to go, so what, until they get to either it's making it safer, it's making it it's making more money, or it's reducing cost. And if it's not doing any of those three things, then why are we doing it?
This just reminded me, something you just said reminded me, in product management, everything you said just makes sense. That you have these three key metrics that you're trying to change, and you will work toward them, and that's great. What about something I've seen often happen at companies is where someone outside of that maker group has an idea about something that needs to happen as part of the process of that maker group doing their work, and doesn't necessarily understand the productivity impact that will have. Have you had any situations like that you've had to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a rare company that doesn't have half the company wanting to write the roadmap, right? I think it's very easy for people to get hyper focused on the thing they think should be built, rather than on the impact it's going to have for the customer. And I think that's one of the real skill sets and capabilities product managers have to have, is the ability to say, like, yes, I understand your cool idea you've just shared with me, but like, what's it gonna help? what needle is it going to move? Why
Mm-hmm.
is it more important than this thing or this thing or this thing that is also competing for time and attention and capacity? And so I think that's interesting. I think where a lot of organizations fall down is that they get too theoretical in trying to defend their wish to work on the things that are most important, and then that's interpreted by other parts of the business as like a lack of direction, a lack of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you have to kind of go, if you end up describing the system that produces the right outcomes and outputs, then sometimes that's just too esoteric for people. And so I think that you have to almost fight fire with fire. You have to go back and say, here's a direct line from a thing we could build to the measure it will affect. And here, direct line here, direct line here, direct line here. Order the measures, not the things. And getting people to order the impact that they want to have over the features that they want to build is sometimes tough. But yeah.
So I think I met you in 2017. We've played this game before. I think it might have been 2016 or 2017. Yeah. So you've been in this business and in the engineering leadership business for a while now. Was this sort of stuff, like, how has your job changed in the last maybe 10 years? Or how has the job of obviously you have grown in skills and experience, but like, how has the job changed?
So I think the job has changed in that it's become more measurable. I mean, I adore Dr. Nicole Fosgren and the work she did, and Accelerate, and I recommend Accelerate as a book to literally everybody I ever work with. And I think just having, we've gone from a world where people would genuinely still be talking about, hey, do we measure lines of code, or like, how do we measure whether, do we even know if the engineers are doing anything? That kind of conversation, to having a much better set of measures that are valuable without being an anti-pattern, right? Because I think that there used to be measures that people would use of engineering and of product development, but they often drove bad behavior, and that was not very helpful. But I think we've gone from it sort of being quite Wild West, and people being very like, well, you've just got to trust me, and you've got to trust the team, and it'll come right if you leave them alone enough, and these kind of things, to it being a bit more quantifiable and a bit more real. I mean, I joke with my team. I say, don't get promoted. It's just spreadsheets all the way down. But I think that's still very true. And, has been for quite a while. But yeah, I probably did my first CTO gig about 10 years ago now. And the thing that was different for me moving into CTO roles was I had been in much bigger organizations before. So I grew up at Procter & Gamble, so was in this kind of really big corporate IT environment in a huge blue chip company, over 150,000 employees and all this kind of stuff. Like I was part of a lot of my time at P&G, I was part of what was effectively a standing army of like tech and finance people, and all we did was acquisitions and divestitures. Like P&G would sell Pringles to Kellogg's, and so then we had to pull that out, and then they would buy something from someone else, and we'd have to integrate that. And at one point, they P&G sold the equivalent of the Charmin and the Bounty business, but only in Europe. And we had to build a wall down the middle of a manufacturing plant, because it was like everything on this side of the wall is going to be owned by a different company, and everything on this side of the wall is still be us. And so, they were literally building, down the
physical structures
down the center of it, which was fascinating. And so my career was kind of like huge teams, huge budgets, huge company. Then I left because I was not feeling like I was close enough to the tech, was going to go to Google or Amazon. And then this guy rang me up and was like, hey, we're going to try fix the government, come help us do that. And he knew friends, and so he called my friends and was like, you need to bring them and convince them that this is only happening once, and this is like a once in a
This is your
lifetime
chance.
opportunity. They can go to Google or Amazon or whatever anytime.
Right.
And so then talked me into going and doing this government digital service project that was super interesting. But then after that, I kind of went to smaller teams for a while. Did some small, back being a tech lead, back being hands on, because I got worried that maybe I was too far away from
Right.
actually shipping stuff. And so I went back into being a tech lead for a bit, and then of course that didn't last because you can only punch under your weight. You get bored, or somebody notices that you could do more.
Right. Next thing you know,
more, and then next thing I knew, I was CTO for M&S.com, which was super interesting. And then the last 10 years have been a lot more in VC backed startups as well. So that's been a whole different world where I learned a lot about how reassuring it was that at P&G profit mattered, because it was like one true measure, right? Like, did we make more money or less? We save more money or less? And in some of these other settings, it's growth above all else, or it's we're now back in what to me is a much more familiar space where like we have to be prudent, and we have to this wartime paradigm that we're in now, where it's not endless money and endless opportunity to just grow and grow and grow, and nobody caring about the bottom line. So I'm actually much more comfortable now that profit matters again. So I find it very reassuring that there's a source of truth in terms of what's good and what's bad, what's up and what's down.
Yeah. I do want to talk just briefly about kind of how a regulatory environment affects productivity, because we often hear, we're a healthcare company, we could never ship that fast. Is a very common thing for us to hear. Like we can't imagine that we deploy twice a year, or we put out a new release twice a year, kind of thing. But so yeah, how does being in a regulatory a strict regulatory environment like fintech or like health kind of affect how you think about productivity?
So one of the things I admired the most about Monzo when I joined there was that they had there were a couple of people, Jonas, who was the founding CTO, and a guy called Ollie, and a guy called Matt, had done some really good work where they'd said, hey, we're getting all these like weird requests, what to us are very weird requests, asking us to do things that seem counterintuitive from the regulator. They want to know what our change windows are and what our change approval board says and all of these kind of things. And we were just like, this is not modern engineering. This is not how, this is not state of the art. And what they did was a huge amount of work to go, why are you asking? What is the reason behind the question? What are you actually trying to protect against? And I talk a lot about change approval boards, actually. I used to say that when I joined a company, I would go immediately to whoever owned the change approval board, because I'm old enough that they existed and they were a big thing. And that change approval board checklist tells you every major incident a company has had. It is the scar tissue of an organization. And you can tell every major thing that has ever gone wrong by what all the manual extra steps are in a change approval board list. And I think that it's interesting then to instead of saying, how do you just keep adding to this checklist until it's 97 things, and then everybody wants to die every time they have to do a change. They only do a change twice a year because it's so laborious. Instead, there was this engineering principle at Monzo, which was to never tolerate deviant behavior, was the phrase that was used. And so if something was broken, you figured out root cause, like what was underlying in the system that was hinky, and you fixed it for real. And so we took a similar approach to compliance. We said, you know what, you're asking a question about our corporate network, and we don't have a corporate network. Our internet in the office is about as interesting as a Starbucks Wi-Fi, right? Like, there is no corporate network here. And so on the one hand, the regulators were like hyperventilating because we said we didn't
How
have,
could
all of these controls on the corporate network that we were meant to have, and we're like, no, but we've eliminated the attack vector. We've taken away the entire risk around having a privileged network by not having a privileged network.
Right.
So by asking why do you care, what are you guarding against? You're guarding against us having someone come and sit in our office, plug a device in, and then have no holds barred access to everything in the company. 100%, we don't want that to happen, but we've solved for it by not having a corporate network rather than by having, the questions would be things like, how often are you doing scanning on your devices in the conference rooms to make sure that nothing's been plugged into them? And it's like, well, we ain't doing that, but for a reason that doesn't do you any good to plug something.
Right, to plug something into our
literally helps nothing. There's nothing special about the internet that's on that connection versus the internet that's at your home right now. And so I think a lot of what it took was just reimagining those constraints, asking why, asking until we got to the underlying risk that they were worried about, and then figuring out how to design that risk to not be real anymore. And it led to some very interesting conversations and some difficult conversations, honestly, because it was a very, very different way of thinking about stuff. But it was really, really helpful. And it helped us actually that the government digital service had existed in the UK, because that had sort of popularized the use of Agile. We had, gov.uk deploys hundreds of times a day. Monzo deploys probably hundreds of times a day at this point. There's a bunch of engineers there. And that being safe was just a very, very different world than what it had been. But I equally remember earlier in my career, I used to run the biggest SAP install in the world, but I'm okay now. And I remember moving one of those teams from deploying every 6 months to then doing every quarter to then doing every month and then every week. And what we were doing was agile software development. I couldn't call it that because we were in a company and people would have freaked out if I'd said that we were doing Scrum, right? They would have genuinely thought it was a rugby team. But by making it safer and safer and safer to do change, you can do smaller and smaller change, and regular releases reduce risk. So I think that's the journey you have to take everybody on.
Yeah, it's so much easier to go on that journey when you're the CTO than when you are a line manager, right? Like, and I don't know if you have any advice for the line managers who don't have CTOs who have gone on that journey.
I mean, I think asking why until you get to the underlying concern, and then learning the language of risk is the other advice I've got. Because I think that a lot of people, so I have this sort of upside down career where I did the very corporate thing early and then the startup thing late. But actually there's a lot I learned in that corporate time where I remember Jonas turning to me when I'd been at Monzo like 2 weeks or something, and I'd gone to a meeting with the regulators and been able to translate what they were asking into what they really meant. And he just turned to me and went like, I wish you were here a year ago. and I was like, yeah, but it took me 10 years to learn all of these words so that I could be
so that you could be sitting in this desk right now.
It takes time. But yeah, I think the main advice I've got is to, don't try to go from deploying twice a year to doing, 100 deploys a day. You go from, how do you take that change approval board list and automate away half of it? And then how do you make people feel safe by showing them that you can deploy safely over and over and over again? And then get to a point where you go, hey, you know what, folks, we haven't said no to a change in 6 months. Is this still a valuable meeting? Like, have we taken all of those 27 points and now we can't ever have to say yes to any of them because we've literally automated away the risks that were there,
they could happen,
that they could happen, and prove that even when something does go wrong, if you can recover from it faster, then maybe it's more okay for the risk to happen in the first place, right? I think those are the faster recovery stories are often the ones that most convince people to accept risk, even when it's technically lower risk. Because you go, well, you know what? Worst case, if it goes wrong, then this is how quickly we can get back from
fix it
from the edge. Yeah.
We do have one audience question that it is another hot take question, which is, how do you measure developers' productivity to justify their performance?
Carefully. Yeah. So I think that there's definitely an argument to gather some stats sort of automatically. So I do care how much code you've shipped and how many PRs you've reviewed and all of those kind of things. But again, it's the start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. And so, somebody has a GitHub contribution graph that looks very sparse for weeks at a time, then that's a question. That's hey, you know what? Have we not got it set up right that they're not getting credit when they pair? And so this is just the person whose hands weren't on the keyboard when they were pairing a bunch of times.
Yeah.
It's very different from, hey, you know what? You seem to have shipped 2 things in 2 months. What's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a matter of having those conversations and a realization that it's always a mix of qual and quant. So I think you always want to be having some quantitative data that starts the conversation, and then follow that up with the assessment of the manager in more qualitative terms of how they're doing. And in an ideal world, have feedback from people around them as well, because I think nobody knows better who's really performing in a team than your fellow engineers, right?
Yeah.
And I think that makes a big difference. So promoting enough psychological safety in the team that people can give feedback and be open in retros and give credit, but also have the difficult conversation when somebody doesn't seem to be pulling their weight. Like, I think that's really, really valuable. And that's the art of engineering management, is create that environment in which great work can happen, more than anything else, because great work isn't telling people what to do and them obeying, right? It's purpose and believing in why, and autonomy, and having a say in how, and mastery, being proud of the actual work that you're doing, and then inclusion, having a sense that you're part of a team, and that you've got somewhere that you belong. And I think keeping an eye on those 4 things all at once is quite challenging, but I think that's where you get the real positive outcomes.
Well, that is a thing that has not changed in 10 years, because I remember you giving me that same list at a pizza place in New York some time ago. Well, Meri, I am sure that as the group CTO of Pleo, you probably have another meeting to go to, or I guess it's not lunch, it's late there. It's my lunchtime. So this has been a delight, as always. Where can people find you if they want to find you? These days
with the and I'm South African originally, right? So I am extra ashamed.
You have all sorts of
like, as if South Africans didn't have enough to be freaking accountable for. Now we have this fucking guy as well. Anyway, sorry. I am technically still on Twitter as geek_manager, but I don't visit there very often. I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days, and so if you just search for Meri Williams on LinkedIn, you'll find me.
They'll find you. Yeah. Yes, aren't we all mostly on LinkedIn these days?
Yes.
Well, again,
who knew that was Microsoft's growth plan was the richest man in the world to lose his mind. Like, some product manager in the center of LinkedIn is just awash in stats, going, I have no control. I don't know what to do.
It's all just happening to me.
It's all just better than the results are better than they were last month, and it's nothing to do with anything I touch.
Amazing. Can't wait for that bonus. All right. Well, again, great to talk with you. I'll let you go and continue with your evening, as I'm now remembering it is for you. So great as always. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Always nice to see you. Have a great one.